He will leave no more trace of his sojourn on this earth than a stone thrown into a river leaves on the surface of the water. Yet it may be that the way of life he has chosen for himself may have an ever-growing influence over his fellow men, so that, long after his death perhaps, it may be realized that there lived in this age a very remarkable creature.
محمد رسول الله الله أكبر إلا الله محمد رسول الله الله أكبر الله أكبر
Donc, bonjour à tous pour cette première conférence donc, de la journée. Hello everybody for this first conference of the day. On va commencer avec comme thème le thème de l'inclusion, où on va parler des solutions de mobilité plus actives et plus inclusives avec nos deux intervenants du jour qui sont Yves Aucré de Police Network et également Jeffrey Baptiste de autodelen.net. You can go now for 30 minutes.
We will be speaking English, the both of us, and I would like to thank the organizers for having us for this half an hour. We will be talking about new mobility services and how they can be implemented. And in my presentation, I will be focusing on the role of local authorities and regional authorities in getting systems such as mobility as a service going, specifically for all that for all target audiences. Couple of words about my employer, the Police Network. We are a network of 70 cities and regions in Europe, looking at transport innovation, and we work on several issues in urban mobility through exchange of information, European projects, and also advocacy towards European institutions. We have an annual conference. Last year it took place in Brussels, and we had a vote in the audience asking for opinions about new mobility services, mobility as a service, and we asked what the impact would be, what the expert audience thought the impact would be of such a service. And what we saw is that in most areas people think there is a positive impact to be expected, but there are two issues. It's the number of kilometers driven. So will all these new mobility services generate more car kilometers instead of less car kilometers? And also the actual impact on social inclusion is seen as a bit problematic. You see that as the 0.2. You don't see my slides? That's strange. Okay, there it is. You see that as the 0.2 on the screen. We also asked what measures local authorities need to take, or regional authorities need to take, to make sure that these new mobility services make sense for the citizen and make sense within the urban mobility system. And the answer of our audience, which is an expert audience of local authority or urban mobility practitioners, focuses on dialogue, but also on regulation. So the need to step in as local authorities, as transport authorities, to structure and regulate new mobility services comes forward in that vote. And this is also the reason why we have gone through a long dialogue with our members on mobility as a service. We have several meetings, had a survey within our membership on the topic, to really understand what mobility as a service actually means for local authorities, to promote integration of new services into also the local planning processes, but also to encourage dialogue between new mobility services and cities and regions. We remember how a couple of years ago Uber landed in Europe in a very aggressive way. It has not been productive for Uber, it has not been productive for all the cities where they started business, so we want to avoid that kind of situations in the future. So we have a position paper, you can find that on our website, and I will quickly go through the main messages of that document. The starting point actually is that integrated service delivery is not new, and an event like this also shows that. Public transport authorities, cities, they have worked on integrated mobility services since 2 decades, let's say. With products also like Navigo, for instance, in Ile-de-France, you bring together a whole package of services for the end user. So the question is, what is what is new when we talk about mobility as a service, what is actually the added value. We also see that the role of governments and local governments is changing in the way transport is managed. We see a very strong focus on policy development throughout Europe, with the development of the PDUs throughout Europe, called in Europe the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, where really most larger cities have a long-term strategy on how urban mobility should look. But cities are also involved in regulation as a regulator of services, and for instance, taxis come to the front in that perspective. Active service delivery and also traffic management, so the actual road management. Technology becomes much more prominent, and also a lot of cities engage in a direct dialogue with the private sector and see them as an added value for the service delivery in the field of transport. The mobility as a service environment is very dynamic. Every week there pops up an app that provides a mass function, and it's very difficult to understand the governance, the drivers behind all the initiatives, to understand that as an individual city. We must say that that the focus on mobility as a service started at international and European level, national level, with the Finns, for instance, who are very active, and that now we see the actual take-up locally, which is another process than if it would have been a bottom-up process of different mobility integrated services connecting to each other, for instance. The mass focuses on door-to-door in many occasions, personal transport sectors. So we really need a good story, a good reasoning to include public transport, cycling and walking in the integrated transport packages offered by mobility as a service. And the involvement of the public actors, being the city or the public transport sector, is something that is on its way, slowly but steadily. So, as we have seen, mobility as a service covers a lot of contents. There's not a clear, a common definition, and we have seen that integrated mobility packages from the side of local authorities exist for a while. So what is actually new when we talk about mobility as a service? We think that the integration of the personal transport offer, car sharing, taxis, etc., is a strong added value. The offer is also personalized, so better adapted to the needs of the individual. We see a higher involvement of the private sector, sometimes a bit problematic in our view, the fact that private sector players start to deliver public sector functions like reselling of public transport tickets. And in many cases, and this is also problematic, these private services are not guided by public policy, causing also issues like a decrease of inclusive service. You see cherry picking, where specific target audiences, the young and the beautiful, we call them, are addressed, but not the rest of the population. So I'm going to go a bit quicker to give Jeffrey also an opportunity to speak. We do see the potential of mass as it is happening. If we can use mobility as a service to promote sustainable travel, to also increase the efficiency of services, also for those that are at the moment are left behind to their geographical location in areas where there is no public transport or no good public service, rural areas, etc. And also the fact that a user sees more options than one is always a good exponent of a system. we think a purely commercial approach will disincentivize sustainable trips, will bring a higher cost for the user and also for the cities that manage public systems. For instance, due to the fact that you lose customers or you lose economies of scale in the public side. And another problem is that we disconnect the actual user from the transport provider and from the transport authority. If the user doesn't see the brand anymore, the direct contact with the public service provider, but if there is an intermediate brand, the fact that you are using a public service can be forgotten, and that also has an impact on how people look to society even. I will skip this one. So we need to find a best role for local authorities when we talk about mobility as a service. We need to find a good balance between the public and the private sector. We need to understand how mobility as a service impacts travel behavior, and also make sure that there are real system benefits and not only economic benefits for commercial players. We need to see how cities can contribute to the market environment for mobility as a service by a better understanding also the business model and also understanding who actually pays for specific measures. And on the long term, and that's something where our cities are really interested in at the moment, is to understand how this will change the procurement of public transport services. So how they, if you sign contracts for bus services of 10 years, how can we make sure that these contracts are sufficiently flexible to integrate new innovations, new kinds of operational models, also beneficial for the transport operator, but also for the transport authority. So that's a big issue. How can we make sure that our contracts are adapted to this new reality? This is something we are investigating at the moment in a European project. The issue of how technology can contribute, how business models can contribute, how operational models can contribute to making mobility as a service actually an inclusive system, a system where all users, all citizens benefit from. And this project is called Inclusion. It has recently started, so there's not a lot to say. But the idea is to combine enabling technologies, so dynamic planning, routing, etc., mobile apps for the end users, but also wearable sensors for certain target audiences to track them through traffic. How they will influence the way people, how we organize regional transport systems, and also how new organizational and service provision forms can be integrated in that way. And then we talk about vehicle sharing, ride sharing, but also other forms of demand responsive transport. So this is the project will look at a number of areas being geographically problematic because they are rural or they are pockets inside a city where there is no public transport. And then also look at specific communities who are living in transport poverty or mobility poverty. And then we look at both the technological support systems as well as the best practices in kind of service provision there is. These are the sites. Unfortunately, there is no French test site, but you can read on the slide the kind of measures we will take in the different areas, addressing, as I said, specific target audiences as well as kinds of measures. So this is on its way, and we hope to report in a next edition of Transport Public about this project. So that was in very brief what I had to say about the way we look at mobility as a service. With our 70 members, we look actively of how the sector develops, how local authorities step in, try to be part of the story, try to regulate where necessary, try to enter in a dialogue where possible. I would like to give the floor to Jeffrey, who will bring a story about car sharing in all its forms and with all its ways of making it happen.
Yeah, thank you, Ivo. Hello, I'm Jeffrey from CarShare Belgium. We are a network of car sharing. We try to promote car sharing in every way. We try to connect car share stakeholders, local governments, and so on. And I've been asked to tell you something about transnational cooperation, and I need this. Transnational cooperation to achieve things, and for us it's achieve things about shared mobility. Well, this is how we are. I already told you. I'm going to tell you something about Share North, about Mobi Hubs, about the Green Deal, and about shared mobility rocks. The Share North stage, we have 2 cities, we have a few local authorities, we have 2 not-for-profit organizations, and there's also a university and a consultancy bureau. And it's all about shared mobility, and we love sharing. We like to share it, we like to disseminate good practices. It's about social inclusion. Shared mobility is more than only mobility, but it's also a way of life. So, that being said, the first thing as a good practice of transnational cooperation is the mobielpunkten, or mobipunten, or mobi hubs, whatever you want to call it. It comes from Germany, went to Norway, went to Flanders, and it's gonna conquer Europe furthermore. So, this is a mobiel.punkt out of Bremen. This is the version in Norway. It's only the dot in the middle that is missing. And then in Flanders we were thinking, well, let's think bigger. It's not only about car sharing, it's about shared mobility, it's about connecting mobility forms. So we started with a designer. He designed a picture, and then we sat together to discuss it. Then we came, what's the main goal of a mobile point? Well, actually it's very simple. It's giving you the opportunity to live without the ownership of a private car. And so we became to a few essentials. Of course, car sharing, because if you don't have a car of your own, everybody needs a car sometimes, so car sharing is very essential. Also bike facilities, and of course public transport, the backbone of our mobility system. But it's more than mobility only. You have the essentials about mobility, but you can add also taxi services, electrical charging poles, and so on and so on. But it's also about a meeting place. A mobile point is in a neighborhood, and you can also just put a bench in the middle of it, and people can meet each other. You can also deliver packages there. Is there... no. I can point with this. Okay, but in the middle you see a share lock. So if you want to have a delivering of a package, well, you can put it in that share lock, and then you only can pick it up from the mobile point. So this is about mobile points. So 2018 will be for sure the year of multimodality. Ivo already told about MaaS. But for us, is MaaS bricks and bytes. You have the online version of MaaS. Everybody knows it's a buzzword. But for us, the Mobi points are the offline form of MaaS. Because if you create a Mobi point on a local level, people walk to or bike to the Mobi point, and from there they can pick up a bus, they can start biking, they can pick up a car, and so on. So that's the offline version of mobility as a service. We started in September in Flanders, and nowadays all political parties are jumping on the Mobi Point hype, and they are putting in every program, every neighborhood should have a Mobi Point. So this is where we are right now. This is Flanders, and you can see we have a lot of Mobi Points already and only started. And there's been promotion in the Netherlands. There's a link with the GPetra project. We are also nominated as one of 4 projects for the International Architecture game. And then there's interest from UK and Letland. So this is a very good example of transnational cooperation, cities, not-for-profit organizations working together and putting up an effort to make something in Europe happening. This is the opening of the Bergen Mobile Point. Next thing, very short, is the Green Deal shared mobility. We are inspired by Holland, where we also signed the Green Deal car sharing. And we thought, well, we can do that in Flanders also. And we want to make it bigger again. And so it's not only about car sharing, it's about shared mobility. And what does it mean? Well, actually, it's a kind of contract you sign, a volunteer contract with the government, and you want to reach some goals. We have 3 ministers involved and then 106 signatories, amongst others police, but also big car companies, big car sharing companies. Drive you will know because this is from France, but also public transport and so on, are putting some concrete actions to reach our goals. And our goals are, we want to achieve 100,000 car sharing people in 2020, 400,000 bike sharing people, and we want to double the companies who are taking carpool measures. And of course, we are looking to the electrical way of living. So right now, 600 plus actions from the more than 100 participants, and it's about mass, it's about installing car sharing, bike sharing, it's about looking for opportunities for insurance, and so on and so on. It's also about communication. So you want to make a buzz of a Green Deal because that's what people are getting back for it. So we made a big deal of it. We made national press and so on. And it's actually not only about the buzz, creating buzz and communication, it's also about combining forces. The beauty of the Green Deal, for me, is that people are sitting around the same table who in normal circumstances would not meet each other. For instance, big car companies with not-for-profit organizations, with governments and so on, with universities and so on. So that was the Green Deal, and finally, I'm a bit in a rush because I think you're all already done, but finally, Share North and shared mobility is all about rocking. It's just, you have to make shared mobility cool, you have to make it rocking, and then you can take it to the next level, you can say to people, you can love it. So, this year, we organized Shared Mobility Rocks. And it was an event like you have a lot of events like Wokomoko, like the Ecom conference, like the Police conference. But the only difference was we made a link with rock. And we had rocking music within, we dared the presenters to have a rocking presentation, so with music and so on and so on. And it was actually very interesting because it was together, it was fun and it was very interesting. And also very interesting is we managed to put together 5 European projects who were also organizer. Next year we will do it, for instance, in Riga, and the year after it will be probably in the UK. Is there music? Because this is this is how it was, but there's no music? Okay, you can see it, you can imagine the music with it. It only Last like 30 seconds. This is the broodrooster pitch, the toaster pitch. It's instead of 1 minute, you have the time for the pitch for the bread to pop up. So this was also an international cooperation to make shared mobility more interesting. And those are the guys who we are working with in the Share North Consortium. Thank you very much.
So thank you for being here. We'll be around for questions for a couple. I have to rush off, but
I'm sorry, but I think we don't have time for questions.
No, but we'll be
after.
around here, just not here.
Okay. Thank you, Ivo and Jeffrey, for this conference. Thanks to you. Next conference now is with Simon Reed, Technological Director. And we're going to speak about IT standard introduction is existing London Bus Fleet from project to operation.
1, 2. Great. Can you hear me okay? All right, good morning. My name is Simon Reed. I'm head of technology and data for surface transport within Transport for London. And I'm just going to basically talk to you about some of the challenges we've got and how we've implemented one of the EBSF2 demonstrator projects in London, how it's worked for us, and what we think that might do to our position with our fleet going forward. So hopefully, got the presentation? Hey, there we go. So there we go. I should try and keep this running for you. So any questions, just stop me on the way, because I appreciate time today. So what are we doing? What's the problem that we have as a transport authority? Well, we have about 9,500 buses, we have 19,000 stops, and about 6 million journeys a day being taken by the bus service. So it's a very heavily used service in London. That said, like a lot of authorities, we are struggling with money. Our subsidy this year has gone down to 0. We get no central operating subsidy at all from government anymore, whereas just 3 years ago, that was £700 million in sterling. So there's a massive drop-off in subsidy. Second thing that we're getting is we're getting a drop-off in revenue, and that's caused by two things. One is our fares are set by the mayor. It's a democratic system, and this current mayor has frozen the fares for 4 years. So whatever money we're getting through, it's exactly the same year on year. We do not have the option of putting the fares up. Very popular policy, but of course gives you a problem as a transport authority. And the third thing is we've got a lot less demand than we've had before. Demand is now much more flaky than it was in a few years ago. Part of this is changing demands of the workforce. People do not work Monday to Friday in the same office every day that they used to do. That's not the way that people work in the area. But secondly, we have to say that there is a bit of a recession going on in London. It might not be officially seen as such, but there is definitely less discretionary travel happening. So travel at the weekends, your choice travel items are not happening as much as they used to. And I think that's reflecting a lifestyle change with people not actually, perhaps you do shopping more online, you don't go to the shopping centres, and then discretionary spend is tight. I'm not going to use the word, the Brexit word, but that is at the top of everybody's mind at the moment, and what our economy might look like in the future. So we have lots of problems. But it really comes back to, for this particular project, what we're talking about is our buses and the bus service and how that's put together. And that photograph is the inside of the equipment bay of one of our buses. And that bus is only 2 years old. And what that basically shows you is that there is every system in there under the sun that you could possibly imagine. So we have TfL, we have our systems are in there, so we provide the tracking equipment. The operators have got their own equipment in there, so they might be doing driver safety, fuel monitoring, any sorts of economy stuff, that will be in there. There's some specified systems. There's an audio system for people with hearing aids. That's got amplifiers in there. But in all honesty, it shouldn't look like that, should it? So when we're talking about maintaining the systems, when we're talking about perhaps wanting to introduce new systems, that's currently our start point. It's got completely out of control. Diagrammatically, when you sort of break that down, if you look at the number of antennas on the roof, each one of those systems is entirely independent from one another. We find that they have got, perhaps they've all got a GPS service on them. Everybody's system, I've walked around here today, it's all the same. Everybody's system has their own GPS service. Everybody's system has their own Wi-Fi for unloading the data at the end of the day. And every one of them has their own wiring, which is what's giving you the example that you've seen on that previous picture. There is no standardization, there is no commonality, and there is no shared use of equipment. So there's some examples there that we looked at. I found there, I said we found 4 wireless LAN services, and we could actually only identify what 3 of them were doing. I've got no idea what the 4th one is doing. I've got absolutely no idea with it. But when you start looking at what that means to your costs, it just tells you that one last point. This is not sustainable, and it is certainly not the way that we should be running a business going forward. So what's been happening? Well, luckily, the whole UITP and the various European initiatives have been running for some years now, looking at innovation projects and how we could get standardization across internal IT systems. There's a bit of a history there going back to 2008 with the first EBSF project, and then we had the 3IBS one, which followed up from that. And we've recently had, since 2013, we've had a new organization set up to sort of take the idea of the standards and to move them forward. So basically, the opportunity came up when the EBSF2 projects were initiated to actually trial putting in a new set of equipment from various manufacturers that we had, and to see if we could actually use the standards that are around to have a sort of plug-compatible system. So if I still had the same AVL reports brought back to the back office, but from any one of the main leading suppliers that are out there. So could we actually do that and get it to work consistently in a London environment? So what we were doing, we were taking, as I said before, we were taking the EBSF 3IBS work that we had. We were using the standard process that's all in place. So you've got VDV, IBIS, you've got the CEN organization, and we were effectively using the EN 13149, that's easy to say. We were using that on-board set of the standards, and for the back office using Syria NetX. Now, many of you may already be doing that, but we currently aren't in London. But we're trying to use that architecture and then to deploy that and take any lessons learned and feed it back into the CEN business. So what we were trying to do, that was the key objectives. If you get the project documentation, that's what it says we were about there. We were going to demonstrate onboard interoperability and to demonstrate back office interoperability as well, and to actually prove that we could plug and play the systems from one manufacturer into the display systems from another. So it wouldn't matter whether you had a Trapeze system, an IVU system, an INEO system, an INIT system, we should be able to have that flexibility around our fleet and yet report them through on any of the back office systems as well. So that was the rough timeline. That's actually a Lego bus at the front there, so apologies for that. I'm not sure how that got into the back. But basically, we were measuring ourselves on a set of success criteria. How much time would it take to install the equipment? What would be the data quality, the time period it would take for messages to get around the bus? And what was the time period for messages to get off the bus back to the back office system? And basically keep measuring that for the 6 or 7 months of the trial. That's just an illustration there. We set ourselves a set of standards to make sure that just as you would if you were commissioning this for an operational service now, that we had a clear definition of what those standards should be. We wanted over 90% of the messages to get back within a finite amount of time. Otherwise, we didn't regard this as a success. So basically, we took the same standards that we have on our current systems and applied this to this demonstrated product. Otherwise, you just got a project that's standing on its own without any measurable points behind it. So what happened? The implementation worked well. We actually had a kickoff event last September, by which time we had all the vehicles working. And then we ran the system for 6 months. And when I say ran it, that meant every bus out there recording the data every single day, reporting that together, grossing up all of the KPI figures and proving that this system actually would really work in the environment it was being asked to perform. And I have to say, it was really successful. We managed to achieve it, managed to send back all of our data, and it worked really well. Come on, where am I going? There we go. The number of people that were involved in the project was a very, very large number. I do apologize to INEO, that's not the right logo for them as they rebranded a little while ago. But the people involved in this, if you actually took the whole organization apart, Metroline were the bus operator. They provided us with all the vehicles and the platform for it. Digimobi were providing technical and project resource for us. Hogia provided the integration capability. So taking each of the individual suppliers' equipment and protocols and making sure that they were adhering to the standards and that we had one clear methodology working between us all. Then we had the suppliers of the systems, which was INEO, Init, IVU, Trapeze. They all supplied onboard equipment and back office systems for us to work with. We had Pilotfish that then provided the onboard comms gateway for all of this, and they provided all the integration on the bus. And then the other two organizations there, we had RTIG, who is, within the UK, most of their offices help us put together our standards submission to the SEN Foundation. So when we talk about feeding back our lessons learnt into the standards organization, they were the guys that helped us out. And finally, of course, through UITP, we've now set up the IT for PT organization to take this whole idea of interoperability out from just being a project and to make sure that we have a living standards organization who can take that, take the concepts forward, help get those adopted right across the industry. And it's really, really good today. If you look around here at several of the suppliers, they are now either have achieved IT for PT interoperability or they're memberships of a society and are planning to do that in the next few years. So that's really the legacy from the project, is the work that's gone into the IT for PT organization and the direction that we see that taking in the years to come. So where are we now? So what? We've done a project, we've proved the interoperability, but how are we going to take this forward? Well, it's given us a lot of confidence. It's really, we're now sort of proposing that TfL will just have a single onboard systems architecture, one IP network, single communications bridge, single storage unit, and shared data services. So what does that mean? Well, that basically means just one LAN around the bus. Now, you might be already used to that here in Europe, but in Britain, that's like, ooh, that's scary stuff to do that. To share services, I only actually want one definition of the location of the bus. Just one definition. I'm in the situation at the moment, whereas if we have to go to court, I can have a situation where the CCTV system thinks that we're at one location, and the CAD AVL system thinks we're at another location. Now, they might be within acceptable tolerances within both contracts, but if you go into a position of police or legal challenge and you've got your bus reporting itself of being in two different places, that's not a good position to be in. So we want to use shared service. We want one definition of where the bus is. We want one route for communication off the vehicle, and we want one way of passing data around between items that are on the bus. So we've taken the IT for PT infrastructure, and we've looked at it, obviously, for London, of course, we're looking at it as a double-decker bus, and what this might look for us. And we're currently working on how we would put that together. So I mentioned before the one LAN, single comms gateway, and a single hub of switches, an IP bridge to get hold of the CAN information, and we want some secure services uniquely for TfL. We have a very successful ticketing system. It's the same ticketing system that we use across the whole piece. Clearly, that's got to retrofit into this architecture so that it works. But basically, we're trying to take the principles that we've now learned and get this applied into the London environment, because at the end of the day, this will help us to reduce costs as well as giving us the flexibility that we need for future development. That's a much better picture of a proper double-deck bus with all of that information on it. I think it's quite interesting there. One of the main advantages we're trying to calculate at the moment, the amount of weight savings that this will do. Because if you've got a bus with every one of those systems, I mean, we've illustrated about 9 of them on there, but at the moment, when you've got 9 systems independently wired, the amount of weight that the bus is currently carrying just for that, just to actually enable that is phenomenally huge. And obviously, part of our mayor's objectives is to reduce the amount of pollution, and weight in your vehicle is obviously the most common way of it causing fuel consumption. So anything that we can do to reduce that back is going to be critical to what we do going forward. I will put some notes of caution. There's some things that we did really learn from the project as well, is that you can have any number of standards that you want, and all of the manufacturers can all agree, and you can prove it on a test bench that what they're producing is absolutely adherent to the standard. But what you cannot do is then plug that together on a bus and assume you've got plug-and-play compatibility. That's not the way this works. What the standards do is set you out a framework, it sets you out an ease of use, and it sets you the position that you can actually do some things. But you still have to, as an operator or as an authority, you still have to run that testing program you're always going to run. You still have to make sure you've got system integrity, and you still have to prove to yourself and through your contracts that the systems are actually going to work in the way that you've intended. That said, TfL sees that the work we did with the EBSF2 project and how that goes forward for IT for PT is critical to making those decisions and how they work going forward. So although we haven't yet mandated that all of our vehicles will be IT for PT compliant, I think the writing's on the wall when you look at the business case and what it is that we're trying to achieve going forward. So what it might also do is give us some advantages. I talked about the size of London's fleet, but there is a sort of a hidden problem there, that if you do go out to the market and say you want one system for London, you effectively tie up most of Europeans' resources to deliver a system to work up to 10,000 buses. And who knows, if we have a standards-based solution, it could possibly be in the future that you would have a much more open vendor market as well. If we all knew the architecture that we were working through, it might be more sensible for us to have different vendors working into some of those areas and spaces, rather than having to supply for 9,500 vehicles. Possible that it will give us options for different delivery models as well. At the moment, we tend to buy turnkey solutions for our bus fleet. Maybe that gives us different delivery models going forward. Maybe there's more of a role for operators. Maybe there's a different role for the authority to pay. Certainly be a different delivery model than we have now. It also allows us to transfer data between authorities. This is one of the things that I think is a criticism for any large city, is that where you have investment, you can do things in your city environment, which is lovely. But unfortunately, most of our public, most of our travelers come into and out of the city every day. And at the moment, data sharing with neighboring authorities is not good in the UK. Very, very not good. We tend to have an operator will look after their own lines. London will look after its own systems. And if you're just living 2 miles outside of London, it's very, very difficult to get that cross-border sharing going. So there's some real opportunities if we were using standard interfaces to take that forward. And finally, as I've said enough times, TfL has got major cost issues. So by adopting these types of standard approaches, we're hoping that we can overall reduce the cost of running the services going forward. So really, I think that's it. That was the sort of main highlights I wanted to put through. I really just welcome your questions on the project, what we've learnt, anything that you would like clarity from, just in the time that we've got available. Thank you. Excellent. I can run away now. Any questions at all? Good. Okay then. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thank
may be that realize
do we want to do then? I've got a foolish notion I want to do my life in just so far.
as a matter of fact, a very religious man who doesn't believe in God.
What do we want to do then?
Have you ever thought of going to the East?
It's all so meaningless. You can't help but ask yourself what life is all about.
Show me the way. First time experience. feel a shadow deep inside my mind. What is magic sound coming from the darkness? I can feel a shadow deep inside my mind. Show me the way to the destined experience. Show me the way to the destined experience.
times of old though. I know it's forward, I must go. But in my heart, feel of your soul. For David said, sons and old to make you cry in a town. You didn't wanna know why. Curse the solo, look on the right, see the tempo. 86 yeah, check out the info. Got me burning for your love, I'm still yearning. Rotation like watch, my mind keeps on turning. You touch me, baby, like no other globe ever could. And now we never thought that we would. But live your life, wishing you all the best. Be our lady soul, go to rest.
What this magic sound coming? I can feel the shadow. Experience. in the shadows.